All right. So, hi everyone. Today is our last Friday food for thought forum about stopping AAPI hate. And today we are talking about how to be an ally to others, especially those in other cultures, and how we could work together. The co-facilitators for today is myself and Miss Kenya. I'll introduce myself and then Kenya could talk. And then I've invited my friend Marco, who's a teacher at Castle Park High. And then one of the committee members, Liza Beth, is here. She's going to be Vanna White working the slides. So my name's Valerie Ruiz. I am a resource teacher, special ed resource teacher in our district. I split between the district office and East Hills Academy. And I am the co-chair for our conference that is our Filipino conference that is next week. And then I'm here joined by my wonderful colleague, Kenya.
Hello, all. My name is Kenya Bratton, and I'm an employee in the district. My purpose here tonight is just advocacy and equity for all.
Yes. So I think today, one of the biggest purposes of today was how do we work with other cultures in a common goal, right? To be anti-racist and to work to these things. And one of the things I think that's important is understanding other cultures. I came to this room to hide because my mother-in-law is in the other room and she might get mad when I tell this story because she loves her son. But I attest this to Marco. I had invited Marco a few years ago to talk at a training I did with paraprofessionals where I wanted paraprofessionals to learn about the races that they're teaching because it's important to understand culture. And Marco was, I tell people that Marco probably saved my marriage, and he doesn't know this. I don't think I've told him this. He was doing his presentation. He was talking about the Latinx culture, and then and I still don't remember the phrase, but he talked about this phrase, and as a part of their culture, talking smack to each other is a sign of love. And I was sitting there and I thought to myself, oh my God, I was like, that's my husband, because my husband and his entire family, that's how they show their love to each other. They talk smack, but I'm very quiet and reserved, and that didn't go. And I would cry and I would tell him, like, why do you do this if you know, like, if you know that it's going to make me sad? And he's like, I'm not trying to make you sad. Like, he would just say, that's how I am. That's how we are. And when Marco said that, a light bulb went in my head and I ran home and I was like, you do love me. And he was like, yes, that's why we're married. I love you every day. And then I told him what Marco taught me. And he was like, why do you think my family hates you? And I said, well, I just thought that's what they did. And he goes, no. And then we did it. So Marco, that day I learned a lot about their culture, and it saved my marriage. So we're hoping that we could do a little bit of that today. So we're going to talk about being an ally. So thank you, Marco.
I'm humbled. I'm humbled.
Next slide, Miss Elizabeth. So we're going to do a little bit of review, and then we're going to talk about allyship and then kind of support and different things we could do. And so I just want the different voices that are here. It's not very formal, just, be open to speaking and sharing your experience. So the next slide, and then the next pretty slide. I just wanted pretty slides. The last 4 sessions, these were our topics: unpacking Asian Americans, the model minority myth, the roots of race and immigration and migration. So I know that some of you have been to all 4, some of you been to 1, and I kind of just wanted to take a moment to talk about what were some aha moments, what are some things you've learned in the last 4 weeks that are helping you grow as a person. Anyone who's come want to say something? Oh, thanks, Elizabeth.
I'll share. I think it was a great experience hearing from my colleagues where we haven't really had a place to talk about some of these things before. And it was just nice to hear from some of these people I've known for years, have worked with them in different capacities, and didn't realize that they were carrying some of those things in their hearts and on their minds. And I'm glad that we had this opportunity to do that. And I'm hoping that this is a beginning to something great for our district. But yeah, that's kind of what I've come away with.
You know, one of the things for me that impacted me the most was during the Roots of Race. Kevin, what's Kevin's last name?
Smith.
Smith talked about microaggressions. And one of the comments he said was, microaggressions are like paper cuts, and that they, you know, they're just little cuts, but eventually become big. And my daughter has come, oh, she's not on, so I'm going to go text her, but she's come to the last couple ones, and it led to a great conversation. She opened up a little bit more, and I was really interested to hear her perspective. She got a volleyball scholarship to play at a very conservative school, and she was telling me all these microaggressions that are happening towards her. And one, like, for example, and I never noticed this, but Brianna's from Spring Valley, California, but the coach on the roster put San Diego, California. And Brianna told me he does that because he says Spring Valley's ghetto, and he doesn't want people to think kids are ghetto from that school. And Brianna, even though, it was just interesting, or, just little tweaks the people at her school are doing towards her. And she said she never knew that word, microaggression, until then. And so it opened up this like flood of, Mom, this is what happened to me, and we talked about what next steps she has to do, right? Like, she has to be able, if it bothers her, I told her, if it bothers you enough, you have to say something. You have to say your address is Spring Valley, California. The house you grew up is in Spring Valley, California. And I don't care what you say. It doesn't matter if it's in the ghetto or not, And so what I really also appreciate is what Elizabeth said, was this gathering of professionals in this space. I've never been a part of anything like this before. It wasn't until I was like voluntold to do this like AAPI stuff that I never spoke about race. I talked about in the last session, my parents never talked about racism. My grandparents never talked about racism, but I know they had to have experienced it. My grandma, my grandpa, my aunts and uncles all worked at the Hotel del Coronado when they first immigrated from the Philippines. There's no way that they worked at the Hotel del for 20 years and not experience anything. So it never was a topic in my household. And it wasn't until all this that I started to try to be a part of it. So I'm glad that I am now. Anyone else did anyone else come to any session that stood out to you? All right. So the next slide, Elizabeth. And then the next word we're going to talk about is allyship, the next phrase, the next book. And then I'm going to turn it over to Miss Kenya. So one of the books that we're going to be doing is we're going to do a book study over the summer called The Book is Anti-Racist. So I used some of the wording from this book. Has anyone read this book or used this book before? Elizabeth suggested it. It's written for students and at their level. And so we were able to purchase 25 books. And my goal is to get students from a variety of different groups together to be leaders during the summer and read it and really digest this book so that they could go back to school in the new school year and help bring this information back to their campus. So whether they're in Mecha or one of the Filipino groups or any of the other groups that we have on campus, that we're going to try to get these leaders. So as you guys, on your campuses, perhaps maybe you have some kids you want to send me their names and they might want to be a part of this. Okay, so the next slide. In the book, Tiffany Jewell says, listen and learn from folks who are outside the box of the dominant cultures. And this is how we learn in our journey, and how she says that this is one of the ways we become anti-racist. Does anyone want to say anything about that or have any thoughts about that quote?
I would probably add, at the risk, it would be important for students to self-identify first in their culture, and then from that lens, connect outside the box to other cultures. Otherwise, they'll kind of take on other cultures and lose themselves more in their identity.
Yeah, I second that. I second that very much so. And I see this in many student groups, but this is especially prominent in special education, where students have been literally stripped of their cultural identities, in various aspects, in many student groups, not just in special education. But I talk to my students a lot about identity and their cultural values, whatever that is for them. And for many of my students, it's the first time they have these conversations in their life. And they speak about never being engaged as cultural beings. And I think that's one of the main issues that we have in our education system. It's why ethnic studies is so important, right? To implement, because if a student doesn't know who they are, right? If a student doesn't understand, their own story of self, then they're not able to fully give the best of themselves to other communities, to other cultures, and then not just give, but also receive and learn as well, and be able to filter and digest, right? What is aspects of other communities' cultures, especially communities and peoples that do not represent the hegemonic cultures, or culture, in order to truly find their own sense of self-worth and ultimately self-determination. So yeah, I think one of the things that I push on my students is this concept of an armed love. And it's a concept pushed historically by people like Paulo Freire, but also bell hooks. And what it is this idea of a fighting love, of a love that's convinced of an individual's right and duty to fight, to denounce, and to announce, right? But that duty, that feeling of that love needs to start at home, right? And by home, I mean in somebody's own self, right? In order to get the tools necessary to feel that duty to fight, to denounce, and to announce. And that way stand in solidarity and be an ally to other communities.
What was that called again, Marco?
It's called an armed love.
Armed love.
Right, like it's a love that's intense, right? But so intense that you're willing to stand up against the hegemonic culture, primarily because you have a sense of self, and because you have a sense of self, you're able to then stand with your fellow siblings of other communities, of other cultural ways of being.
So I hear both you and Kenya talking about a student having to know who they are first. So, and who they are first, and then also who they identify with being, right, culturally. how do you suggest that's done in the classroom? What does that look like with our students?
One suggestion I would have, because when educators, as odd as it is, talk about race and culture, if they do, oftentimes not, I think it's important to start off with like a genogram. So you kind of trace your cultural heritage. Aunts, uncle, like the family tree, okay, but genogram is a more advanced concept. So if you start in that context, you're not talking about race necessarily immediately, and it gets people to typically to a comfortable zone. So you start off maybe like for my genogram, there's only 10 family members in my family, and that includes my great grandmother to myself, only 10. But some families may have 100. And what I'm learning about even the 10 is not really the best affirming, but it does give me a sense of why I feel like which one of these don't belong, or which one of these do belong, and just the culture behind it. My grandmother passed for white her whole life, and never really claimed Black until she was in her 90s. But that was something I never knew until maybe 20 years ago. So if students kind of create a genogram just of their family, genes, heritage, who had more influence, who did they learn from, and start with familiar connections, I think that would be a good segue for cultural and race connections for the entire class to feel courageous. That's just one idea to explore, but I found that to be effective.
Yeah, I like that. It like eases you in.
Or it eases probably the teacher in, or the students. Because I'll say I'm Black all day, but for other students, if you're not the hegemonic culture, you may not, people know you are, so do you have to say it? But if you do it for your cultural roots, you'll get probably a better connection with folks.
I'm going to do that. I'm going to do one of those, because I'm a biology teacher, right? So it goes perfectly hand in hand with that. And yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think in addition to to things that teachers can do inside the classroom, activities and curriculum, right? I think teachers have a responsibility to study and to learn and to be avid learners of things that are going on in other communities, and to really, kind of drop down their own, as much as they can, right? Like drop down their own like biases of what a community it is and isn't, and what they're going through and not going through, and just listen. Just sit down and listen and learn, especially from those people that are saying, hey, I need help. Hey, I am going through something, right? It's important for us as teachers to learn from our students. And I'll give two examples. I have one student who's Filipina, and another student who's Black, and he identifies fully as Black, but that's also because, and I make sure to always affirm his Black identity, but that's partially also because nobody has ever asked him, right, about his cultural roots. I'm the first teacher to know that his family's from Honduras and from Puerto Rico. So he's from the African diaspora, right? But not from the traditional, right, what we understand as an African American diaspora, right? And so he has had, a teacher's always like, he's told me, he's like, teachers always ask me, who my favorite rapper is, right? And that's like their go-to, like to try to connect with me, right? And instead they don't ask me, you know, just simple things. Like instead ask me like, what type of music do I like? That way you'll know that I actually like reggaeton and bachata, right? And not that I dislike rap, he says, right? I actually like rap, but their go-to is they see a black kid, right? And they want to know what my favorite rapper is, right? Instead of just asking me like, what type of music do I like, right? And so these are like, those are microaggressions too, right? Because we are automatically, assuming the cultural background of this student. With my Filipina student, first and foremost, I think teachers have the duty to culturally sustain and culturally revitalize students' identities. So I have a duty, therefore, to learn about social issues that are occurring, social, political, cultural issues that are happening in the Philippines, right? So I know that she goes once a year back to her family, right? And so I try to read up on things that are happening in the Philippines, right? So I know about all the policies, good, bad, ugly, and everything in between that President Duterte has, right, like implemented, right, over there. I understand, right, the recent meteorological weather events that have occurred, right, and have caused certain communities impact, right? So I ask her, things like, how's your grandma doing? Right? How is your grandma doing well after that recent storm? Right? And little things like that is like, how did you know? I was like, I'm addicted to the Weather Channel, but no, right? It's just I have an armed love for my students, and I'm willing to learn about her, right? And I'm willing to learn about David, right? My Boricua Puerto Rican student, and I'm willing to engage their identities and their wholeness for who they are, and just go in with a blank slate, but also an informed blank slate, right? Because when I mean a blank slate, I don't mean like David, independently of him being his family from Honduras and Puerto Rico, American hegemonic culture still sees him as black, period, right? And American hegemonic culture will still, engage with him as a black young man, right? And so I also go into that conversation understanding that his teachers, law enforcement, administration, right, the clerk at the supermarket, they don't see him for his totality. They see him as another black young man, right, in this culture, in this society, right? So and same with my Filipina student, right, who has a stutter, right? Society will see her as less than because she takes an extra 2 seconds to get her sentence across, right? And so what I mean by a blank slate, I mean by a blank cultural slate, a blank cultural slate that's still aware of what's happening.
That's powerful.
Well, thank you for sharing right? Like now I have some ideas of what we could be doing. On the other side of this coin of what we just talked about, what we could do with our students, what could we do with our colleagues, right? Who have, like Marco was talking about like the microaggressions. How do we have these discussions with our colleagues at our sites so that they understand, they understand our cultures or what we're going through and better serve our students in that way? Does anyone have any things that have been successful that have been successful that you've done with colleagues or at your school sites? Because I know, I mean, this is my 21st year of teaching, and never, with the exception of the one multicultural class I had to take in credential school, never has there been a PD that I've attended where we've talked about this. There might have been, like, maybe at a faculty meeting, a little discussion about like what Marco talked about, because I could imagine that teacher who was like, "What's your favorite rapper?" I can imagine, like, in my head, I'm imagining positive intent. That teacher was like, okay, here's this Black kid. He must like rap, like, but like, I know that I totally understand it's a microaggression, but you know, we learn as teachers, we learn how are we going to connect, but how do we learn? How do we teach those teachers that that's not good? Does that make sense? Has anyone had anything successful at their sites where this has been talked about? Hi, Dina.
Hi. Hi everyone. Sorry for jumping in late. I wanted to share a story. When I was there at Sweetwater, I had this one student who was sent by his Spanish teacher to be disciplined for acting out in class. And rather than going to the assistant principal's office, the campus security stopped by my office and said, "Hey, I have so and so here. Do you mind talking to him? Because he's like really aggravated, and I think he needs to talk to somebody." So in speaking to him, the young man is African American. He was like, "You need to get me out of that class. My teacher's racist." I said, "Well, what does that mean?" And he said, "She called me the N-word." I said, "What? What?" I was like, "What do you mean she called you the N-word?" And he said, "Yeah, she called me the N-word." I said, "Okay, well, let's just back up. Let's talk about what were you learning in class?" And he had shared that they were learning colors. I said, "Okay." And so I said, "So like blanco is white, rojo is red, all of that, right?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Did she say negro?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "That's black in Spanish." She goes, "Yeah, but she said it and then looked at me." I said, "Whoa, okay." And the other kids started laughing. So I got pissed. And, and the teacher just got mad at me. And so after we talked that over, and and I had told him, "Hey, so the rest of the week, just hang in there with me and we'll figure it out." I asked the teacher to come over to talk about it. And her initial reaction was she was upset with our campus assistant for defying what she wanted him to do to get in trouble with the assistant principal, and instead of sending him to the assistant principal, he sent the student to me. And I said, "But wait, there was no need for him to be in trouble, though. There's no defiance issue here. It's a misunderstanding." And this is what I told her. But initially, prior to that, she said, "I don't appreciate being called a racist." I said, "Well, let me tell you why he said that." And so in talking about it, I don't think she really understood what the student was experiencing. And because she was very defensive, and she was like, "Well, it's not my fault that the other kids laughed in the class." But it's like, no, it is your fault because you looked at him when you said that word. So, the kids knew, they pick up on that stuff. But the happy ending to that is that they were able to work things out, and and he passed the class and he was able to graduate. But no one, I don't think we've had a courageous conversation like that. And if we ever did have courageous conversations, it's a very superficial one, so that you get to talking about definitions of terms, you get to talking about understanding what all of that is, but really in application to your life, that's never been talked about. And there's always pushback with it, even when you talk about it in a small group or in a large group or individually. And so I think we have to get to a point where we say, screw the feeling uncomfortable. our kids are not thriving. Our African American kids are suffering, you know, and our Filipino kids are staying silent, but silently suffering, you know, and our Latino kids are feeling disenfranchised as well. So the adults need to step up and say, okay, we are going to have a courageous conversation with each other, and we're really going to talk about that white elephant that's in the room with us, and really talk about that. Because if we continue to cater to people's level of comfort, it's never going to change. And sadly, though, we do this with each other as brown and black people. You know, we do the same thing, and we cannibalize each other. It's ridiculous in the policies that we have at the schools, in using numbers as a reason to not provide services. You know, so we don't have a lot of African American kids there, but does that mean that we don't look at what they need? We don't hire more counselors who look like them. We don't hire more administrators who look like them. You know, so what if they have a small percentage? So what if our Filipino EL kids are a small in number? We don't offer bilingual support for them. You know, those, if we're going to be true about what equity is, then let's talk about equity, because that's what equity is. It's not, you know, don't tell me you're going to work on an equity level at the district or in the classrooms or with working with kids, when really the definition of equity is not what you're saying. You know, how you behave in an equitable manner is not equity. You're working in a equal kind of formula, not equity formula. So I can go on and on and on and be on a soapbox about it, but my answer to your question, Valerie, is that adults cannot be afraid to have this conversation. Adults need to take those courageous steps to be very honest about each other and themselves, because we're not going to get anywhere with our kids until we can look at what we have to do and cross that bridge with each other.
Thank you, Dina, for your passion. I wanted to add to the conversation, if I may. I want to look at the other side. Speaking about race and culture is scary for many people when you are employed and have to take care of your family, because many folk who determine your employment can bring harm, and you won't, or you'll be ostracized, cross-eyed, considered. So there's many of these terms that are connected to if you're an advocate for race and culture. Equity is not the same as race and culture, but it's easier for people to talk about. SEL is not the same for race and culture, but it's easier for people to talk about. What we do know, which is not only research-based, but culturally based, is if you ever talk about equity, you actually have to talk about race and culture. You can't get away from it. So I do want to take note for those who may not necessarily be comfortable with it and may not even know what a courageous conversation is. And I'm sorry to say this openly, it's impossible to know about everybody in your class at one time. But if you do start with the concept of everyone in this class is valued, and let me learn as much as possible as a teacher to gain from my students, and they share openly, like you weren't here when I talked about the genogram, then students will find similar identification when people start talking about their families, their cultural roots, and what they experience that may be racist, discrimination, microaggression, harmful, hurtful, trauma, etc. So I do want to take defense there. But I have an experience too where I've needed culture brokers several times in my job. And a culture broker has existed even before it was popular in the 70s and 80s. It's basically someone to kind of intervene on behalf of one culture to the other, which actually did start during slavery because you had to talk between different plantations. So you needed someone from that cultural plantation, et cetera, talk to the other. I'm not saying adopt anything slavery minded, okay? But when I would work with parents who thought that they were not getting what they were entitled to in special education, they would speak to me in English for months, even years, till I said no. Then immediately, I never really understood English for the last year. And so then I would have to go to one of my colleagues, but that's because I'm culturally mature and not taking offense, and say, hey, I need your help with this case. I'm not asking you to take it over. So that would be the responsibility of that teacher, counselor, principal, etc. I don't want you to take over. I just need someone who may identify with that culture better to help bridge us so we can get a better understanding, common understanding, or move forward. So sometimes there may be only one Asian on campus. That happens quite often. One African American, and it doesn't mean that that person identifies with that group. So I know there's been research in the past, you have to have people that look the same, but as I get more mature, they may not even identify with that group. So I would say we start with what is the foundation where we could find a commonality that may be able to link folk. And then it can't be a PD. It can't be a 4-week training on AAPI. It can't be restorative justice couched as this is working with culture. It has to be the infrastructure. First of all, do all the board members participate in ongoing cultural awareness and responsibility for a year first? Then do the principals. Then do the APs. Then do the counselors. It really has to start with infrastructure first as a commitment. Not saying the kids needed to get it together or the teachers need to get it together, but that's only one opinion.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Marshall.
Yeah, no, I love what Kenya was saying, and I'm sorry, I didn't get the name of, I didn't get your name. You're listed as SUHSD Academy. I'm sorry.
Dina.
Dina.
You don't know the dynamic, Dina, Marco? Where you been in this district?
Yo, I got a lot going on.
But Dina, we need to get that on our shirt.
I love what you said too, and I really want to talk about like that moment of uncomfortability, right? Like that I love that. I love that moment of I like relish in like uncomfortability. You know what I mean? Like I really like, I look forward to moments of discomfort. Because I see them as like some of the purest learning opportunities. Like in my own discomfort, right? Like I try to be like attuned to like, oh, I'm uncomfortable right now. Why am I uncomfortable? Right? Like, who do I need to like speak to? Like, let me take a couple breaths, a couple steps backward, right? To like really, really like analyze, right? And look into this discomfort, right? And the rationales behind it, right? Am I being irrational, right? Or is this discomfort valid? You know, or let me actually speak it through. A lot of us, we get uncomfortable, and our innate reaction is to fight or flight, right? And I think as educators, we have an obligation to do neither, neither fight nor fly away, right? We have an obligation to scaffold, right? To scaffold through that discomfort, right? And try to find the root of it. And it comes down to being a radical, right? Radical means, radix is Greek for the root, right? And I think that's a side note. I think that's like a term that I feel has been consistently, yes. I think that's a term that's been consistently, what's the word I'm trying to find? Misused in the U.S. hegemonic view, you know, the term radical, not just misused, but inappropriately used for other people. You know, like I get so angry when I hear CNN or Fox or MSNBC calling saying these white supremacist radicals. Like, there's nothing radical about them, right? Like, they're not analyzing the root of problems, right? They're not actually scaffolding to get to issues, right? They're not radicals, right? And going back even earlier to my math, right? To my math background, it's exactly what a radical is in math. It's trying to find the square root. It's trying to find the main issue of a problem. I focus a lot on, because of my own background, honestly, I focus a lot on the Chicano, Chicana, Chicanx, Latinx experience. And more specifically, the Mexican trans-border experience. There is, I try to frame and introduce the concept of colonialism to my colleagues, which is a concept, if race and racism makes people uncomfortable, the concept of colonialism, right, is like another universe away for many people. But I think it's actually, once you start to speak through colonialism and how colonialism has impacted everyone that's on this call, right, in their own unique ways, through U.S. intervention and wars in other countries, through the Atlantic slave trade, through wars with our neighboring countries, and even more and the genocide of indigenous people, right? Japanese internment camps, so on and so forth, right? Like, examples abound. But through that lens, through a lens of colonialism, I think we are able to find a more important lens, which is solidarity. And I think that is really the idea that is missing a lot from our conversations. Because what good is it that I've gone to 100 PDs on, cultural sustainability and restorative justice and all this stuff, if I'm not willing to enact solidarity? If I'm not willing to stand shoulder to shoulder and side by side, right, with the person that is in need. And I think that when we engage each other through I always use the concept in Lakesh. You are my other me, I am your other you. If I do harm to you, I do harm to myself. If I love and respect you, I love and respect myself. And when we begin conversations through that type of energy, then I think people are more willing to be, one, vulnerable, right? And then two, more willing to hear your loving critique. And I think through this lens, I have been able to have several conversations, especially with my fellow Mexican, Chicano colleagues, on their anti-Blackness, on how you're promoting dual language programs, but a fifth of our population speaks Tagalog, right? Like, you're totally forgetting over here, and so on and so forth, right? Because they understand where you're coming from, right? And so they're willing to really hear you out. And even in moments that are more tense than others. So what I would recommend to my colleagues is that if you want to help promote justice, then you need to be first vulnerable with yourself, right? With your own insecurities, vulnerable with your other colleagues. You need to then show them that when you are engaging these very difficult topics of race and racism, that you're coming at it from a place of love. And then from there, C, get to a place of unity, get to a place of solidarity. I have some little issue with the word ally, and only because, not because I dislike the word ally, but because it's been, like the word radical, abused and misused so often, right? Like, I'm an ally now because I wrote Black Lives Matter on my Facebook. Oh, I'm done. Ally done, right? So I've tried to introduce to my colleagues terms like co-conspirator, right? Terms like accomplice, right? Like, what is it? Because an accomplice, like when I think of an accomplice, I think of somebody that's like helping someone else rob a bank. But it's like that, but it's that level of commitment, right? It's that level of commitment that your pain is my pain. I don't know your pain, right? Like, you know your pain, but I'm willing to stand shoulder to shoulder with you in it and with it. And through there, help you facilitate your own liberation, your own self-determination, because as we say out in the streets, no one's free until we're all free. And yeah.
Thank you. That leads us to how we define allyship as part of this conversation, knowing that there is a continuum of where one may fall from allyship, from interest to quiet, quiet connections, to solidarity, to unity, to ride or die, for lack of a better word. So how we define allyship with our next slide, it's that in terms of the AAPI, what we're supporting is that it's not about Marco or Kenya or Valerie, but it's more of an we. It's not a performance where you just sign the initiative for anti-Asian hate, but it's more of what you do. It's not about how many likes you get on social media, but if you get the likes and that's leading to action for change, we're okay with that. And it's something that we are working towards for a just society. So Valerie did share, for those of you who signed on later, about the book club, that the book club is not necessarily 100% for the adults, but we would really like for some students to participate in that process as well. We know the influence of young people is very strong for any change in any society. So that is just one form of action. At the end of our presentation, we are asking, you're not pressured, but what would be your allyship? And it may not be today. We just hope it's by July. No pressure, but what might be your allyship? And I'll be willing to share mine later. Okay, next slide.
So we've done, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Kenya. So we've done a lot about this, about listening to one another today and throughout the last the last few sessions. So I won't speak much about this, but really, these are some reflection questions on, as we continue to be, and like Marco said, conspirator. That's what she uses in this book too. And that was the first time when I was listening to the book, that was the first time I had heard that word used in that context. And I thought to myself, yeah, like that's it, right? And so that was good. Marco had also said that, but like, who are we listening to, right? When we're trying to do this, when will you listen and when will you interrupt? And Elizabeth's presentation, the very first week, she talked about, and now I can't think of the phrase, Elizabeth, coming in and coming, no.
What's calling people out versus calling people in.
Right. And so that was that during her presentation, that was the kind of first time I've ever thought about that. She used an example that she had, but you know, when you hear something wrong, are you going to call them in or are you going to call them out? And Elizabeth explains, like, there's not one that's better than the other, but what's appropriate for that time and what's gonna help the learning in that situation, right? You calling someone out and yelling at them and making them feel awful, is that really gonna help them? Versus maybe if you took them aside, but maybe they do need to get called out, right? So just being able to think of both that and listening to one another. The next slide. All right. So this,
Valerie, I wanted to extend your point. Yeah. And if you're doing a calling out or calling in, you have to come from a place of, what's the term Marco used today? Armed love. Because everyone may not be receptive to it. They may be ignorant in that moment, but they may actually come around the following week. So I just want to help you to understand, sometimes when people hear that they've made, okay, there's this quote I read, don't let a difference become an offense. So sometimes people are going to hear a difference in language, change in their mindset, and they're going to be offensive. And you have to stay the course with armed love and say, I just want you to consider X, Y, and Z if you receive it or not. Just colleague to colleague, friend to friend, etc. I had an experience recently, last week. A student came to enroll and someone else was helping the student. It's an adult student. And the adult student had several surnames. And the comment was, so what, your parents had nothing better to do just to give you a whole bunch of names? Hee hee ha ha. So it was a Hispanic student. Okay. So privately, I said to him, sometimes that might be considered offensive in some cultures, because people carry on the legacy of their parents' names. And given these current times, if someone passed away with that last name, they may have become more identified with having that other name. So you may not want to kind of make light of the jokes. And the response was, well, I've been working with Mexicans for 20 years. No one ever told me anything. Yeah, okay. Still doesn't negate what I'm saying. Just be conscientious of it and let it ride. My daughter has several surnames. That's not why I spoke on it because of my own kid, because she's Hispanic and Black, but I spoke on it because that's common in many cultures. Even when Vietnamese transition here, they change their whole name to an American name. But as you get to learn them, they'll tell you all of their names. So I was just trying to help him be mindful rather than taking offense. And I did in my head say, well, he ignorant, he don't know. But I'm just saying, but I didn't tell him that. But interesting enough, here it is another week later. He's like, hey, thank you for letting me know and not letting me know in front of other people. So eventually people will come around.
Thank you, Kenya. Arm love. I love it. So when Kenya and I were preparing for this presentation, we kind of thought of what could we do, right? Like, how could we support? How could we be conspirators? How could we be allies? I like the Nate word. Sorry, Marco. How could we, what could we do? Now we've got 4 weeks of all this. How can we move forward? We're going to do a book club. And we thought that, and Kenya gave you a deadline of July, right? Like, what could we do for like a few months? So it's not like, okay, you're going to go to like every rally in all of San Diego every time there's a rally, right? But what's one thing that you could commit to for 3 months to be a conspirator, to be an ally? And then we could come back together in another 3 months and we're going to talk more about like how we've grown, what have we done. Now, these examples are not the end all be all. And I'm sure people on this call might have far more better examples than I put on here. But we have, raise money. I know that this month I've seen a lot of things. It's because it's Asian American month, a bunch of organizations raising money to stop AAPI hate. Educate yourself. We have this book study. We've been coming to these things. I know for myself, I have grown tremendously in this last month, learning and having these conversations. As I said earlier, I've never participated in any of these kind of conversations before. And it probably was, you know, we talked about that model minority. Like I am that model minority, where I am that Asian stereotype. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to say anything out of turn. I don't want to do any of those things. I often say that I sometimes have to think about what I have to say, because I know my parents will not be happy that I'm doing this, because they too don't want to rock the boat and want to do that. So educating yourself, like I said, go to a protest, show solidarity with others. We talked about that, being side by side with our brethren, and then shopping, supporting businesses and creators of color. So we talk in our, one thing that we're doing in our conference for next week is we've been collecting our conference, and I'll talk a little bit about our conference later in a bit, but our focus next week is community and how food is important to our culture. And so we've been trying to gather this information of all like Filipino restaurants, or restaurants where there's a Filipino chef or cook or something, so we could support those. Many of these small businesses have suffered during COVID, and especially suffered because they're Asian, because of the hate that has been happening. And so we've developed this list, and when you're able to see the program next week, you'll see all these cool things. And I've been going, one cool thing is I've been going to different classes, talking about and telling people about our conference next week. And I always end with, what are your favorite Filipino restaurants? And there's always this kind of debate about Tita's versus Jollibee versus Jochi's, right? And like it gets pretty heated. And I'm like, one's not better than the other, but right, like that's our culture. And I want the kids to, I want, one thing about our Makaisa conferences is showing that there's people out there who look like them, who are successful business owners, right? Like right now we're talking about the food industry, but in October when we have our larger conference and we bring in people who are engineers, who are, you know, those, but we bring in, my favorite is Margaret Atwood, who's a prominent tattoo artist here in San Diego, right? And so then we bring in like all those kind of non-traditional things, but most importantly, these kids are seeing people who look like them being successful, and you know, they get to learn from that. So I got a little far away from this slide, but besides these kinds of things, what are some other ways we could support each other and be conspirators with one another?
One thing I would like to do to support more Asian American influence is in adult education. In Asian culture, typically it's expected that you're going to be a doctor, nurse, a health type of medical profession. So in adult education, we have pathways where young people can become qualified in 18 weeks and have a job, which can lead to an independent business while they're deciding if they want to go to college. So right now we do have an initiative for the Drone Project for African-American males and Hispanic females with disabilities, but not more Hispanic females with disabilities, African-American males first. But what I would like to do is work with my colleague, she's on here today, but I won't name her because I didn't get permission, on what pathway that may be non-traditional for Asian Americans, and strategically do outreach for those students to choose a certification pathway, not in replacement of college, but so they could be working in 18 weeks, making money, and their parents can see, oh, they can have sustainable wages and a viable career while going to college.
That's, you know, Kenya, you brought up something that happened to me this week about, you were talking about adult school and Asians and the expectations that are in our households. This week, I had the pleasure of being with Elizabeth and Laura reading Filipino scholarships essays. And I text my brother and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm reading these things and these kids have 4.6. And then I swear one was like just a list of acceptances of all the UC, like it was like Cal, that shout out to Marco, Cal, right? So it was like Cal, UCLA, US. And I was telling my brother this information and he told me, you know, he had just read a study, and I know that Laura, who is on the call with Margaret, I've seen it in a presentation Laura has done of that. And correct me if I'm wrong, Laura, that there's so much burnout for Filipino students once they get to college.
Mhm.
That our Filipino students are working so hard and doing all these great things, and then they get to college, maybe they go away to college and they don't know what to do with that independence, and they don't know what to do with that, and they either burn out or they drop out. And and my daughter is on here now, and my brother said, well, Brianna finished her first year of college and she did it, right? Like, and I said, all right, like she, you know, because he was saying how good we were able to support her, and hopefully she wasn't feeling that burnout in high school that many of these students feel. So yes, Kenya, I really like that, because those kinds of things are not, and I know the Filipino counselors on here, Elizabeth, Dina, and Ron, could attest to, like, those things aren't talked about in Filipino households. Non-traditional pathways are not spoken about. I could tell you, my dad, I've always wanted to be a teacher. And I don't know why my dad couldn't get this through my head. I wanted to be a teacher since I was in the 9th grade. No other thing did I ever want. But my dad wanted me to go to the Naval Academy. And he was in the Navy. He wanted me to be, I don't know why. I never said I ever wanted to be in the Navy, but he put a poster up on my wall. I didn't tell him to put a poster up in my wall. He put a poster up in my wall. He talked about it all the time. And then I remember, because we were living on a military base overseas, my dad knew the day that the admission letters came out to students. My dad probably did not even pay attention to me because I didn't even apply to the Naval Academy. and he came home and he was like, so did you get into the Naval Academy? And I said, Dad, I didn't even apply. Like, I don't know, what are you talking about? And I kid you not, I got beat up that day. Like, my dad, like, he was not happy with me. And I was like, I'm going to be a teacher. Like, and so, and I'm not saying every Filipino kid gets beat up, but like, that is what happens when you don't follow that path. And now I'm crying. But so, Kenya, thank you for thinking about those kids. So we had 2 hands, so I could stop crying. I'm going to go to Margaret, and then I'm going to go to, so go ahead, Margaret, first.
It's Laura. Go for Laura.
Hi, Laura.
Hi. I know we're kind of already going over our time, but I just want to bring up the point that what I was really wanting to study was how successful our Compact for Success program was, because we spent all this time and we have this agreement with San Diego State trying to get our kids to college. How many of them actually finished a bachelor degree was amazing to me. It was a fraction, of course, of when they started as freshmen. I don't have the exact number, but it was in the low hundreds. And this was many, many, many years ago. But if you look at, any of the UC campuses, the state campuses, the AAPI organizations always have one of their focus is to retain students, right? So we know it's a issue. We do our best to get our kids prepared and get accepted. And then what happens after that, right? So there's money put aside at the universities to get our kids to finish. So that to me is very interesting, and I would like to. I'll look, Kenya, if I can, where that research came from. It was a long time ago,
Okay.
but I think it would be great for us to delve into that further. You know, we're doing what we can to get them in, and then where's the support, or what can we do to make sure that they finish? So,
Thank you. Ron?
Hi, everybody. I could not log on. I'm not sure why. Hi, everybody. So, my apologies. What is the name of this topic, by the way?
We're just learning how to be allies, and or as Marco says, I'm just picking on Marco. I learned from his culture to pick on one another, to be conspirators. So how could we work together in support to be anti-racist?
Oh, okay. Wow. Well, anyways, I was in Florida for a whole week, and it was a learning experience. I was like the package with my coach, two coaches, and then Ensenada, four of us, and we're all people of color. We experienced racism. It was a learning experience. It's not our team. We just have to go with the flow, but we're there to win. And then we get into the finals, and like we just stepped back, you know. So the other thing is, I'm gonna retire very soon, and 33 years doing this job. You know, like a lot of my mentors, like 10 of you all that are retired in the district, give your blood and guts and soul, and it's a thankless job, and the values haven't even improved, seriously. And so I would like to see conversations. Like I remember I was in college at San Diego State, Samhan. We went up to Delano. I don't even know what I was doing, but we went up there. So I think if you have conversations with people like my parents' age, grandparents' age, they don't believe in any of this non-traditional stuff. They want you to go get a college education. So I started breaking it down, college readiness. It's really so you make the world a better, more educated place. When you have more educated people, and then, you know, you not only have network, you know, like you get Rift, you have a network, you get another job. Not only that, you're just making the place a more educated place to live. I think the reality is it's all capitalism and materialism and all the isms. Seriously, it's sad. That's all I want to say.
So Ranello, I appreciate you sharing that. I would like to hear more about your allyship. If you are retiring soon, how will you recruit Asian and Pacific Islanders to apply to Sweetwater that may be that will really create more of an alliance and advocacy for all peoples of color in the district, so we can kind of shift the mindset of a thankless job? I'm not saying I agree or disagree with you, but I do agree that because you have a lot of stature in the community, that perhaps helping to recruit more Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders as a counselor would be definitely a benefit.
Right. So thank you, Kenya. I don't really know you, but thank you. So briefly, like if you join professional organizations like Philameda, for example, I rejoined and it's great, awesome. It launched my career. Scholarship committee, it can really launch your career. A professional thread, like all the professional threads, the Philam community getting involved. So I think that's what the Filipino community really wants, like having their children get educated, because a lot of my teammates, they're upset if their son, for example, chooses not to go to college. They just want to whatever be a pro in any whatever, and then they end up personal training, not even making any money, and then they're upset. Their child's now 26, 27 and no education, nothing. So
I'm not speaking against college.
Professional threads, and then I think mentoring, because I notice in the Filipino community, we envy people, we don't help them. We actually get upset, I think, when others are thriving and, you know, happy and prosperous and whatever, promoting. I think that's reality, because I compare it to, I remember Korean families, they do a small business loan, they help those families get started, and then they're there every step of the way. There's no envy. Seriously. There's no like, oh, you know, that person just got whatever. And then there's no like, you know, keeping up with the Joneses, materialism and all that. Seriously, I think that's what it is. So there's professional threads, and I think that mentorship is everything. And I think we all do it. But look, there's a lot of apathy. Friday, we're all worn out. Everybody's doing something else. The greatest thing is recorded. These, programs through the cultural diversity has been great. It's learning. But if you really break it down, you talk to all the grandparents, the parents. I remember a lot of conversations. My parents just wanted me to be a civil engineer. I didn't have any math and science skills. I'm not going to do it. I wanted to be an athlete, but my mom said no. I ended up being a counselor because I was talking to a lot of people. My library boss told me at San Jose State, just ask people what they do for a living, find out. But I think the values are all screwed up. So to answer your question, allies, we just mentor people. And hopefully people, instead of apathy and all this other stuff that they prioritize, they'll watch these threads. I don't know how long these video threads will last here, so that they can listen. You could have conversations and say, go check it out, have conversations. Because again, it's a sad day. I feel disappointed that I didn't do my job. The world's not a better place to live, in my opinion. I don't want to be negative, but it's just a sad day. Seriously.
So Ranella, we're going to go to Margaret while you're thinking about how you will personally commit to some type of allyship, mentorship, doing a presentation for that agency or group that you were talking about that helped you to also get into the profession. Okay, Margaret?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, sorry about that. That was a
old hand.
leftover hand raise.
Oh,
Go ahead,
I
Dina.
put it down.
Nina had a hand.
Sorry about that. I had to let the dog out real quick.
Oh.
Who let the dogs out?
I think what Ranello said really does speak, and what Valerie said really does speak to that colonialism, that colonial mentality that has been so embedded in the Filipino culture. And I think that's what makes the struggles of Filipino Americans just a little bit different from other Asian American groups, is that the whole, that the hundreds of years of history of being a colonized country really has impacted our how we look at ourselves and what we value. And so for me, the whole idea of what education is and why it matters in not going into a non-traditional career really has a lot to do with what our parents didn't have growing up. And so in coming here and having all of those dreams, of course you want security because you didn't have that. You want that for your kids. And for here, the idea of having a secure job, and education is just a means to get a job. That's really what it is those traditional fields where you can make money. But we've got kids growing up now who don't believe in that, who want to grow, who want to find themselves, who want to express themselves artistically, who want to be courageous and jump those opportunities and those careers that may or may not make money, because it's all about, making your life a fulfilling experience rather than finding job security or finding security because I'm afraid of not having anything, of not being able to eat, of not having a place to stay in, of growing up having to struggle. But in terms of the ally, Kenya, for me, what my allyship is to continue to advocate for what I think it needs to be advocating for, to advocate for what, to lend my voice into things that need to be lent to. And it may or may not be popular with a lot of people, especially with people who could be in that position of power that needs to hear it. But for me, I'm too old. I've only got like maybe 6 years left in the district, and doing things on an individual level is effective for that individual, but it's not going to make a difference for my kids who are going to come up and are still dealing with the same thing that we've been dealing with. And so that's my commitment, is to continue to say what I need to say, is to continue to challenge what needs to be challenged, whether or not people are wanting it. What I would love, though, is to have people support, if they support what is being said out there, for people to participate in these kinds of conversations and support those who are putting their necks out for them. I think that's important because you're always going to have, I think it's important that you have your supporters and those who are going to be willing to put their necks out. And for those who are willing to put themselves out there to lift that voice, they need folks to say, hey, thank you, or hey, I may not be out there speaking publicly, but let me write a letter of support, or let me talk to my friend to see what we could do in the community. I think for me that would be my commitment.
Thank you, Dina.
Thank
And Elizabeth?
I just wanted to say thanks to Kenya for opening that door, that idea of opening recruitment and increasing efforts on getting our AAPI kids interested in adult school. I think there is, I mean, I know we've already said it, there's like this stigma about not going straight to college after high school in the AAPI community. And I mean, it's that or nothing. And I think it's important for families to understand that, you'll get there, you're not taking this route to get there, but maybe you're going to go like this to get there. And we have lots of other options to get kids there. And I like that. That hasn't been something I've thought about, and you've planted that seed in my brain. So, and then with Ranella's retiring, and he mentioned Philomaida. So Philomaida is a great place to get involved as a retired person. So speaking of mentorship, and all of that.
Thank you.
I know in Philomaida they have a hard time with membership and actually recruiting people who are actual educators right now to be part of those types of things. And so I think that's something else that could be focused on. Well, in regards to allyship and what the next steps are, I'd really like to see something move forward from this forum, from what we've started here. Like, I really hope this doesn't fizzle out. I hope it develops and grows into something, and I'm willing to lend a helping hand to those efforts if it's needed. But yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Next slide. Oh, sorry, Ron. So first, I want to make sure I say thank you to everyone this evening for being vulnerable, for speaking their truths, teaching me and teaching others about how to help our cause. I want to make sure I invite everyone to our conference I'm almost done. Sorry, my nephew, I promised that I would do crafts with him, and I said I have to work, and he's like, for a long time. So I want to make sure I invite everyone to Ube Eats, a bite of Makaisa, which will be next week, and I will send people. You could find the information at our Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, SUHSD Makaisa. Can someone put a link in the chat for me? And then we're going to learn and be with other Filipinos to learn about how they got into the food industry, how they've survived the food industry. And then we're going to see some things in action. But for me, one of the cool parts, the one part I'm looking forward to is the afternoon session. We're going to have 3 sessions. But one is going to be called Lola Diaries, where we're going to have this oral tradition, right? This oral history of our students sharing how food has affected their life. I always think about my grandma. She lived with us when I was younger, and her always being in the kitchen and how she showed her love through that. I know that you can never go to a Filipino house. How should I say this? If you go to a Filipino house, you're going to leave full because they're going to show their love with food. I know Marco, I'm just going to share Marco's story if that's Marco put it publicly on Facebook, so I think it's public. Marco learned our food puto the other day when they had it at Castle Park High. I guess Vicky brought it and he was just like, huh. So I found that story funny, Marco. But then we're going to also listen from our scholarship winners and how that food affected their lives. And then we're going to have our last, we're going to sum up kind of everything. It'll probably be very similar to this presentation and how we're going to move forward with our students and how we could support them through the school year and what they're feeling, especially as we go back to school, right? Like Laura did a survey and she talked to the students express even during distance learning, feeling having racist remarks towards them because of everything that's happening. Imagine what it's going to be like when we go back to school for our students. So we want to make sure that that we support them. We just used all your words different, Marco, is what happened to us. So I just want to make sure I close and say thank you for joining us for the last 5 weeks. When we put this together, this was beyond anything that I thought that it would be like. So I want to make sure you know that I am grateful for all of you for coming. It's hard for teachers on a Friday. And so for you to all be here shows how much you care about our students and how much you care about our community. So I'm going to end by saying thank you. And I hope that everyone has a great weekend and hope to see you next week at Ube Eats.
Hey, Valerie, there's
Yes.
no time. There's no time on the flyer. I thought
well, that was our save the day. I'll send you, Ron, the times and the linkage.
Because if high school kids join in and they want to participate, it's next Friday, but it's during the day, 9 to 2, like a field trip.
Yep.
They get attendance credit.
Yep.
They'll probably want to do it. They'll hang out with their friends.
We have, Elizabeth and I looked at the numbers right before, and we have over 200 kids signed up.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So I'm so
great
excited.
job, everybody.
Yeah. So thank you, everyone. Have a great night. Marco, Kenya, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for the invite. Thank you very much.
Good night, everybody. See ya.